Okay, today something different, an action-packed story about non-violence and making peace, told by the Buddha himself. The Buddha uses this story to teach the monks at the occasion of the quarrel of Kosambi. At that time, two fractions of monks sort of forming, and they are arguing whether a monk has committed a very minor offence or not. And then the Buddha tries in various ways to harmonize them, but first is not successful, and then he makes one last attempt to teach them by telling them this story to more or less illustrate the meaning of a Dhammapada verse and make it more memorable. So this Dhammapada verse, hatred is never ended by hatred. Hatred is ended only by non-hatred. And these stories in the Vinaya, in the Mahavagga, in the Kosambi chapter, in case someone wants to look it up. So I think it's not so well known because most people don't read Vinaya. So a long time ago, there were two kingdoms in northern India, and one of them was the kingdom of Kasi, is the capital of Varanasi. The king of this kingdom was the king Brahmadatta, and in the west of northern India there was the kingdom of Kosala, and King Dighavu ruled over this kingdom of Kosala. And the King Brahmadatta and the kingdom of Kasi had more wealth, had a more powerful army, and was more prosperous and more powerful. And the kingdom of Kosala was less powerful, had a smaller army, and was less economically developed. So this happens many times in history. The more powerful kingdom feels compelled to attack the less powerful one and conquer it. And so King Brahmadatta is assembling an army of infantry and chariots and cavalry and war elephants, and launching an army to conquer the kingdom of Kosala. So King Dighavu hears of this offensive of the King Brahmadatta, and he knows he will not even be able to defend himself against one attack of the king of the kingdom of Kasi, and so he escapes from his palace, and together with his wife, and they just dress up as wanderers and escape, because they know that they wouldn't be able to defend the country. And so King Brahmadatta is successful. He conquers the kingdom of Kosala and rules over it. And King Dighavu and the queen, they manage to escape successfully. And they travel to Varanasi, to the capital of their enemy kingdom, because then probably they think the King Brahmadatta will not suspect that he will escape to the enemy kingdom and hide out there in the capital of where King Brahmadatta is living. And so the two are just sort of living in a potter's sheds at the suburbs of Varanasi, very simply, and staying there and for a longer time. And the queen gives birth to a son, and they name him Prince Dighavu, which means long life. And so, the prince is growing up, and once the prince is older, then the king and the queen think maybe at some point they might get discovered. One never knows. So they rather sort of let their son live somewhere else in another place outside of the city. And so then they stay sort of separate, and occasionally Prince Dighavu comes to visit their parents. Yeah, so at one time, the former barber of King Dighavu is visiting Varanasi, and because he was close to the king, he recognizes him. And so probably King Brahmadatta knew that his enemy, King Dighavu, was still around somewhere. He escaped. He didn't capture him, so he probably would pay some reward if someone would capture him. And then, the barber tells King Brahmadatta, he's seen the former king of Kosala. They are hiding out in this potter shed, living there as a wanderer with his queen. And so King Brahmadatta sends his soldiers to capture the king, and they are successful and bring him to King Brahmadatta. And so King Brahmadatta then he decides to get them executed. So King Dighavu and the queen are led through Varanasi, and in a sort of more or less public event to out of the southern gate, then in this direction, to get executed in the outside of the city in the south. And so at that time, Prince Dighavu decides he might visit his parents to see them. And so as he just happens to go to Varanasi, he sees that his parents were actually captured, and they are just led to the execution site. And so then, as his father is walking past Prince Dighavu, he recognizes him, and so he's giving him some last advice. And he says to his son, "Don't be far-sighted, don't be short-sighted. Hatred is never ended by hatred. Hatred is only ended by non-hatred." And the people standing around him saying, the king is talking nonsense. Who is this Dighavu, and what does this king mean? It doesn't make any sense. But the king says, those who are wise, they will understand the meaning later, and he repeats his message, his last advice to his son. Don't be far-sighted, don't be short-sighted. Hatred is never ended by hatred. Hatred is only ended by non-hatred. And so he repeats his last words a second or third time, but then the soldiers just grab him and lead him to the execution site. And so the father and mother of Prince Dighavu get executed by being cut into 4 pieces, and the remains get scattered and buried in various directions. And the Prince Dighavu obviously is very sad that his parents were executed. But then after he's recovering, then he's thinking how he can more or less arrange at least some sort of proper funeral for his parents. And so he's going to the executioner site and starting some friendly conversation with the guards there. They obviously don't know who he is. And sort of drinking some alcohol with them, and so getting these guards of the executioner sites drunk, and then he manages to overpower them. And so the Prince Dighavu is building a funeral pyre for his father and mother, the king and the queen, and then sort of cremating their remains, and so commemorating this funeral pyre 3 times with Anjali to pay last respects to his parents. But they're in Varanasi, King Brahmadatta is standing on the terrace of his palace, and he sees that far away in the south of the city, someone is lighting a funeral pyre for the king and queen of Kosambi that were just executed, and so he knows some relative is still around and looking for revenge, but he doesn't know who it is, so he has not really any idea, and is just worried. What will happen now? So someone is obviously intent on revenge. And so then Prince Dighavu is thinking how he can more or less take revenge, and so he tries to get close to the king in the palace. He is just a young man, and so he would be just normally to learn some craft. And so he approaches the elephant trainer in the elephant stables of King Brahmadatta. And so he says, he would be interested to become an elephant trainer and learn the craft from his teacher. And the elephant trainer is happy that he has a disciple and someone interested to learn his craft. And sometimes, so he's learning there, becoming an elephant trainer and getting skill in it. Sometimes in the evening, Prince Dighavu is singing and playing the lute. And then one evening, King Brahmadatta is walking past the elephant stables, and then he hears Prince Dighavu is singing very beautifully and playing the lute very beautifully. And so he's very impressed. And so then he asks his servants, who is this young man who is singing there so beautifully and playing the lute so well? And they tell him, this is the young apprentice of our elephant trainer in the elephant stables. So he says, get him. And so the Prince Dighavu gets called in front of King Brahmadatta, and so he asks him, did you play the lute and sing in the morning or in the evening? Doesn't matter. And he says, yes, I did that. And so then the king says, well, then sing and play the lute and show me what you can do. And so, and to win the favor of the king, Prince Dighavu is singing very beautifully and playing the lute very beautifully. And then, the king is very impressed, and he says, so he's more or less elevating him to be part of his personal entourage and attending to him. So he gets in a position which is more like close to the king, and in a more like a privileged position as a personal servant. And so for a longer time, Prince Dighavu is there in the entourage of King Brahmadatta, his enemy king, and he is acting very friendly and pleasing the king in every way, and doing any service that he can for the king. And so the two get more close, and then one day King Brahmadatta goes on a hunting expedition and tells his servant Prince Dighavu to get the chariot ready. So then they drive out to go hunting somewhere in the wilderness. And at some point, the Prince Dighavu is steering the chariot in such a way that the king gets separated from his army or his personal bodyguards. And so they drive for a while just on their own, but King Brahmadatta finds Prince Dighavu quite trustworthy, so it seems he's not worried about it. And so they drive for a longer time, and then the king says, I'm quite tired now, I just have a rest now. So he stops the chariot, and then Prince Dighavu sits down, and King Brahmadatta is so sort of feels so at ease being together with him that he actually lies down in his lap. And so the king falls asleep quickly. So he seems to be trusting him. And so then, Prince Dighavu thinks, King Brahmadatta has conquered a kingdom and killed my parents and done us much harm. And now the time for revenge has come, and he's sort of drawing his sword and wants to cut off the king's head. But then, just as he's getting ready, he remembers the last words of his father. Don't be far-sighted, don't be short-sighted. Hatred is never ended by hatred. Hatred is ended only by non-hatred. And so because of his last words of his father, he calms down again and puts his sword away again. But then again he gets overpowered by his desire for revenge and draws his sword again, and so he's sort of going back and forth, what to do now. And so this happens 3 times. But then suddenly King Brahmadatta is sort of waking up, terrified and frightened. And Prince Dighavu is pretending that nothing special happened. And he says, "Oh, Your Majesty, why are you suddenly sort of waking up so frightened and terrified?" And the king says, "Oh, I had a horrible dream. I dreamed that Prince Dighavu, the son of King Dighavu, the king of Kosala, wanted to kill me with a sword." And so that's too much then for Prince Dighavu. He's sort of grabbing the king by his head and drawing his sword and says, "I'm Prince Dighavu, and you have conquered our kingdom and killed my parents and done us much harm, and now the time for revenge has come." And so King Brahmadatta is going down on his knees and begging for his life. And he says, "Grant me my life, Dighavu, grant me my life." And but Prince Dighavu says, "Who am I to grant you your life, king? You are the king, you have to grant me my life." And then King Brahmadatta says, "Well, in this case, I grant you your life, and you grant me my life." And so Prince Dighavu is taking King Brahmadatta, his enemy, by the hand, helping him up, and they grant each other their lives, and swear an oath not to harm each other again. And so then King Brahmadatta and Prince Dighavu drive back to the palace, back to Varanasi. And then King Brahmadatta is assembling his ministers, and he asks them, "If you would see Prince Dighavu, the son of the king of Kosala, what would you do to him?" And one of the ministers says, "We would cut off his nose and his ears." Another one says, "We would cut off his feet and his hands." Another one says, "We would cut off his head." And King Brahmadatta says, "This is Prince Dighavu, but I order you not to do anything to him, because we granted each other our lives, and we swore not to harm each other again." And so then King Brahmadatta asks Prince Dighavu, "What was the meaning of this last words of your father? Don't be far-sighted, don't be short-sighted. Hatred is never ended by hatred. Hatred is only ended by non-hatred." And Prince Dighavu says, "Don't be far-sighted" means don't bear ill will for a long time. And don't be short-sighted means don't be quickly to break with a friend. And hatred is never ended by hatred. The meaning is he tells him, "You, king, conquered our kingdom and killed my parents. But if I would have killed your majesty, then those who would have been friendly and supportive of your majesty would have again tried to kill me. And then those who supporting me or relatives of mine, they would have tried to then kill the other side again. And so in this way, hatred would have not ended by hatred. But now we have granted each other our lives and have sworn not to harm each other again. And in this way, hatred has ended by non-hatred." And so he says this was the meaning of the statement of his father. So and then King Brahmadatta says, he's really amazing how wise Prince Dighavu is. And so then at the end, Prince Dighavu actually marries one of the daughters of King Brahmadatta, his former enemy. And King Brahmadatta gives the kingdom of Kosala back to Prince Dighavu. So this is the end of the story in the past. And then the Buddha is encouraging the monks, and he says, if kings who are used to violence and weapons can have such friendliness and gentleness, then you have gone forth. You should basically shine forth even more and to have kindness and gentleness, which is similar. However, the story first doesn't end beautifully and harmoniously. And so it's this nice story, but then actually the reality is actually different. So in the Vinaya, so the monks, they actually don't want to listen to the Buddha even after this story, and so they just tell him, may the Blessed One, the Lord of the Dhamma, dwell in a peaceful abiding. We will sort out our quarrels by ourselves. So basically, they're sending the Buddha away and telling him to just they sort themselves, and they just tell him to go. And so in this case, the Buddha just actually sees it's sort of not possible anymore to instruct them. And then he's just setting his lodging in order and then on the next morning he's taking his robe and bowl, and then he's sort of speaking some last few verses in the midst of the Sangha there on terms of non-violence and sort of ending quarrels. And then he's sort of he's just walking away because he sees they actually cannot be, they're not so receptive and not listening to him. And I think first he's going to Barileya to stay, and he's just staying there on his own under a young sal tree. And then some elephant who is also looking for seclusion, he's sort of staying here in this area, and is bringing the Buddha water to drink and water to wash his feet. And so they're staying there peacefully together. And I think then the Buddha wanders on to meet Venerable Anuruddha and two of his companions. And they are completely opposite to these monks in Kosambi. They are completely harmonious and peaceful, living together. And so this is a very big sort of contrast. And so you can see the Buddha is just seeking out some people who are actually listening to his teaching and interested. And so then at the end, this conflict still gets actually resolved. So just to give a brief summary, more or less, then I think after a while, more or less, the lay people there in Kosambi, they're upset because the monks more or less, because of the quarreling monks, the Buddha left, and so they stopped to offer food to the monks and pay respects to them. And then, so after, basically, when they get this sort of treatment, then they come to their senses, and they walk quite some distance to some other town where the Buddha is staying, and then are able to settle the conflict. So, yeah, it's just an example. Like during the time of the Buddha, how the Buddha deals with conflict, and so this nice story. But then, yeah, obviously, if the people are too confused or too have too much aversion, then even they wouldn't listen to this beautiful story. Yeah, the reason why I told this story, for anyone who wasn't there at noon, I talked about the topic on non-violence, so then it fits together with this story. Yeah, maybe a short addition to your question at noon. In terms of you asked, I talked more about, let's say, non-violence in terms of avoiding getting, let's say, involved with any unwholesome actions oneself personally, but sort of what could a country do as a whole to avoid getting involved in wars. I think one thing that came to mind would be to not to join any military alliances and to adopt a policy of neutrality into the constitution. At least, I'm not so not so knowledgeable about history, but let's say, for example, with Switzerland, I think even during the First and Second World War, there was not that much. They were not directly involved in the war, and I think they were not at least directly attacked. Obviously, they also suffered some economic disadvantages and so on from the war, but I think they were not directly involved, at least to my knowledge. And obviously, I think on a larger scale of things, I think of neutrality would be more or less similar, like adopting a policy of non-violence. And obviously, that one, for example, that the country doesn't give any military aid to any whatever kind of country, or doesn't sell weapons, and has sort of just a minimal of army or even none. And and so also for myself, because my mother is from Switzerland, my father is from Austria, so two neutral countries. At least I found it pleasant to live in a neutral country during the Cold War. For example, I found it more pleasant than, let's say, than rather than staying in the country of one side or another side of the Cold War. At least from my knowledge of history, often I think people have this perception that military alliances protect the country, but then from my memory it often leads to that it's actually to get you involved in conflicts, because then if one country is attacked, then at least from the two world wars, from my memory, then there's then one country gets into a conflict somehow, and then it spreads out and all these countries get involved with it. While if you're not, then obviously if you're for one alliance, then you're against the other one. If you're for the other alliance, then you're against the other one. So then naturally it's just sort of prone to, you're either for one or for the other, and then you're sort of naturally involved in conflict, just like if maybe in your office two people don't like each other, and then if you're for the one, then if you're against the other one. So it's similar, and so also on this larger scale, at least it would be the only thing that came to my mind as addition to that. So we can sometimes remember the last words of Dighavu's father: don't be far-sighted, don't be short-sighted. Hatred is never ended by hatred, and hatred is only ended by non-hatred. So try to develop this attitude and see how one can act in a way which sort of is in accordance with this teaching. Okay, then we can share merits with all beings.